welcome to the 79th meeting of the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, or COMSTAC. I am Brian Berna, the designated federal official responsible for compliance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, under which this Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee is being conducted. This meeting is being held in accordance with a notice published in the Federal Register on August 22nd, 2024. The agenda for the meeting was announced in the notice, and a more detailed agenda is posted on the FAA's COMSTAC website, and if you're in the room, right in front of it. I also have a responsibility to adjourn the meeting, should I find it necessary to do so in the public interest. As the DFO, it is my responsibility to ensure the agenda is followed and the accurate minutes are kept. Only COMSTAC members may participate in any discussions and vote on matters put on to vote by the chair. I would like to thank our chair, vice chair, and COMSTAC members for their hard work and dedication to helping FAA enable safe space transportation. Now, I'd like to hand it over to our chair, Ms. Karina Dries.
Thank you, Brian. Hopefully y'all can hear me. I didn't get a chance to do a sound check. I just want to say good morning to everyone. And I'm very sorry that I'm not able to make it in person today. Fortunately, Mike French is able to make it, I hope. Hopefully he's in the room. So Mike will essentially be acting as chair today, and he'll be running the meeting and facilitating the discussion today. I'll hop back on when we start to discuss task number 2 and walk through some of the information that we put together there. So Mike, over to you.
Great, thanks, Karina. And Brian, just before we start, are we able to see other folks that are on? Who else, the other members that are online?
Hey, Mike Moses is here.
All right, great. So we just
Michelle Parker's here. Karen Shanorik.
Hey, Mike, Ann is on.
great. So I had Mike, Karen, Michelle, and Ann. Did I miss anybody? All right, excellent. All right, great. Thank you all, and thank you all for those who are here in the room with us today for our last COMSTAC meeting of this term, as well as those online who were able to do this. I just want to thank Brian Berna. Brian's support over the last 18 months or so, 24 months, has just been incredibly helpful to make sure that we finish out this term strongly. Whole series of recommendations. Last year looking at quite a bit at 450, and then the work that led to, I think, a lot of Spark activity, and obviously as that continues as well. So just thank you, Brian. Thank you, Karina. I know for many of us, this is our last meeting after a 2 or 4 year term. It's been a real pleasure, and Calvin, thank you for that opportunity, to serve, and hope to see this continue. As the next crew comes together. So it's an incredibly important avenue for industry, for stakeholders, and AST's responsiveness to the recommendations. I just think are important. So thank you, Calvin. All right, well, with that, a little housekeeping. We may be able to tighten the agenda up a bit. So absent complaint, we will press forward and see if we're able to wrap this up a little shorter. Thank you to the AST team is sort of prepared for that. Should we be moving a little faster on some of the things down the road here? So thank you all, and we'll go from there. With that, let me turn it over to Calvin. Sir.
All right, thank you. I don't have to go to the podium. I don't think. I'm probably just talking here. Good morning, everybody. Good to see everyone. Thank you all for taking time out of your very busy schedules to take part in this very important conversation that we're having at least twice a year. Conversations as well. I know it's the last meeting for a few of you. I'm going to get some acknowledgments in a few moments, but being invited to serve on the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee means you bring a level of technical expertise and experience to the table, and that you're committed to sharing that experience to improve the needs of this broad and diverse industry and to serve the public. We appreciate that. Over the last 40 years, the FAA has relied on this committee to come to us with informed, viable, and meaningful recommendations to help shape necessary regulations, policies, and procedures that will support commercial space transportation for the coming decades. Responsibility for ensuring safe commercial space transportation, for protecting the public, safeguarding property, and upholding the national security, foreign policy interests of our nation does not rest solely with FAA. My team in the Office of Commercial Space Transportation is fully dedicated and working tirelessly to deliver exceptional results along with you. I'm so proud of our team, some of the world's foremost experts in their field, new staffers who show a tremendous amount of rigor and vigor in their roles every day. Everyone in this room certainly has their own interests, and sometimes they compete with one another. But everyone in this room also must be committed to the same thing, and that is ensuring safe and successful commercial space transportation. This has to be a priority for everyone. I think we're all clear on this, but I'll repeat it for emphasis. Maintaining safety is critical to the uninterrupted success of this industry. Last week, perhaps some of you caught it, I don't know if you did or not, I testified before the House Science Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics. And we got a few questions from members of Congress based on feedback they've been getting from members of this industry. Not all of you agree with everything that was said. I know that, and I appreciate you letting us know that. AST expects oversight and scrutiny, and it comes with the territory when you regulate growing industry that has public safety impacts. Many of the questions focus on our licensing regulations, Part 450 in particular. I did share with lawmakers that we have mixed results with implementation so far. Some things have worked, some things haven't worked. We knew that going in. But that we are optimistic about gaining the full benefits of Part 450 in the near future as we draw closer to our March 2026 deadline. It's going to be tight. We know that. We're confident that as more operators adopt it, both government and industry will experience the efficiencies promised by Part 450. I'm breaking my remarks here just for a minute. I do want to say I felt terrible after this. I really did. I felt, after reflecting on it a little bit and thinking about things, I really felt bad. Felt bad for my French. It kind of felt like, it felt like I was, a good-looking guy at the party everybody wanted to talk to, and Mike's there at the party with me. I want to talk to Mike.
It's been that way since middle school.
I felt terrible for Mike. Wish more people would talk to Mike at the party, but anyway, Mike, sorry about that. Anyway, back. I did assure Congress, and I'd like to assure you that the Office of Commercial Space Transportation is committed to regulatory clarity. Believe it or not, we are, so that operators know what it takes to fly safely and protect the public from harm. We want to be sure that our regulations are understandable, achievable, and in action. So I want to review 3 topics that kept coming up in the discussion, clear up any confusion. We'll try to clear up any confusion as best we can. And I'll cover licensing compliance, I'll cover pre-application periods and environmental reviews. First, on the compliance piece, we understand that approving compliance with safety regulations can be complicated and time consuming. It's rocket science, and get that. Flight safety analysis standards are the product of 30 years of work, primarily by the Department of Defense, and are the universally accepted standards of space transportation safety, rooted in science and engineering. The government made a decades-long investment in establishing and improving these standards. They are available to anyone who wants to invest in this. In case this isn't clear, my team didn't raise the bar. So again, we did not raise the bar when it comes to flight safety analyses rigor. When Part 450 was written, we provided the necessary transparency to help applicants with this. So far, we've granted 6 licenses under Part 450. And I do want to correct something I said last week. I said that only on one occasion had we not made a determination under Part 450 within the 180-day period. It was 2 occasions. Correct that. Sorry about that, Matt. Get that. two occasions. One was certainly Starship, and the other was Relativity. So those were two that we did not. We know that successful applications use logic, math to define how their methods demonstrate compliance. They speak directly to our regulations. Ambiguous applications are legally unenforceable and leave room for unsafe decisions. The rationale must be a solid justification. Successful applications cover the entire regulation, including matrix requirements. You can't pick and choose which things you want to address. Successful applications spell out assumptions and rationale in the context of conditions you expect a company or an industry expects to operate in. And they also discuss uncertainty. Successful applications base each method on generally accepted engineering. Regulatory compliance can't be an other duties as assigned responsibility, but rather must be given to people trained specifically in the complexities of flight safety analysis. To help, we posted the slides and recordings from last year's methodology workshop, which provides foundational keys to success in flight safety analysis. And my staff is very close to issuing an advisory circular called Flight Safety Analysis Methodology Rigor. We expect to have that issued in the next few weeks. We will also issue a number of advisory circulars to provide additional clarity where needed on means of compliance and more planned. A second recurring theme is the pre-application consultation period. We've heard that it's unfair that the clock doesn't start counting toward a 180-day termination at this time. Let me be clear up front. The pre-application consultation period really is intended to be an assist to industry. If we started the 180-day clock at the time of the commencement of the pre-application period, the determination certainly would be much quicker and easier because it would often, unfortunately, result in a no or denial. It's just difficult to get to a complete application and get to a yes answer if you're starting the clock at the moment a company wants it or has an initial consultation. Regulatory compliance needs to be considered in parallel with development, not just when a company is ready to launch. So I think it's really important that the compliance piece should be on any company's critical path as moved to this launch campaign. We require a pre-application consultation to answer operator questions and establish a clear understanding of what it takes to succeed. We consider it operator-driven because it can be as short or as long as an operator wants it to be. Consultation period ends when an applicant begins submitting the scope of license and means of compliance. So that's when it's over. Once the application period materials start to come in, we really consider the application consultation to be over, and now we are in what I will call the application acceptance period. We must accept, of course, means of compliance before we initiate the formal review period. So that's the step between pre-application and formal review, set the means of compliance. And so once we have that in place, we have an accepted application, we start the clock. So that's how that works. We've issued multiple advisory circulars, including the guide to a complete application. But some applicants are still submitting multiple versions before their application is complete enough to accept. On average, it takes anywhere between 6 to 18 months to reach complete enough application. We're trying to work to shrink that down. That's a long period of time I would commit. Certainly to get that down. That's what the numbers are going to fall today. We continue to encourage our operators to ensure that licensing applications speak directly to our requirements at the outset, with clear narratives that spell out how their methodology support the means of compliance. Our data reveals that under the legacy regulations, the FAA processes one license modification for approximately every 3 launches. If industry were to improve that ratio to 1 modification for every 6 launches, we could gain a considerable amount of staff hours to go to licensing needs of many operators. With 450, the need for mission by mission modifications and approvals is really necessary. However, we find ourselves in that boat more often than not. When a quality application is provided by an applicant at the start, a more expeditious approval is possible. That was the point I tried to make last week, but here it happened. Good, solid applications that are complete at speed, robust management regulatory requirements at the beginning of the process lends itself to faster determinations. Let me talk a little bit about environmental reviews. As you know, we conduct environmental reviews based on each application to consider possible significant consequences and to inform the public. The issuance of a launch license and a modification are considered major federal actions under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. In the case of a modification where the prior analysis doesn't account for full environmental effects or changes, the FAA completes a supplemental or tiered analysis in support of the license modifications in accordance with NEPA, the Council on Environmental Quality Regulations, including NEPA and the FAA instructions. Under the Endangered Species Act, the FAA consults with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service. And operators' proposed operations are used to determine the impact areas for the respective consultations, and mitigation measures are developed based on the impact areas and level of environmental effect. The Endangered Species Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, and other laws require that if new and different operations are proposed that are outside the defined area or have greater impact than those originally assessed, the FAA must reopen or reinitiate the consultation to assess the new impacts and determine if additional mitigation measures are required. So that's a little bit on the environmental piece, and that's why we sometimes have to reopen environmental reviews because we have to comply with those laws. I certainly want to remind everyone of a number of the actions that the FAA has taken to improve internal efficiency and bring solutions to the table. Number one, we have bolstered our staffing to handle licensing, permitting, and inspections. We're currently now at 158 staff members. That's as large as we've ever been in our history. We're on a very robust hiring campaign over the course of the last year, and want to thank our team and our staff for working hard at bringing those people on board that we needed to help meet the demand that we're facing every day. The President's fiscal year 2025 budget request will continue this support by providing funding for the agency to hire additional staff, conduct authorization evaluations, safety analysis, and safety inspections. Already more than 60% of our staff is dedicated to these functions. And again, the 25 budget request, which appears to have good support so far from the appropriations committees, will really help us continue to move the ball forward to keep the facing. We provide an assortment of simple and transparent aids, including checklists and visual tutorials to assist with applications. Our teams have been widely available to applicants through office hours and workshops where industry can meet with us to ask questions and discuss issues. This week, these office hours are being expanded to cover a larger range of safety analysis topics. We're available throughout the determination process as we seek the right information from you to make informed decisions. So what's happened here recently is pre-application, which has taken up a lot of our staff time. We've sort of moved more towards the office hours. So we're really encouraging the industry that if you have questions or if you have ideas or things you want to talk about, we're setting aside a dedicated amount of time each week for industry to come in and talk with us about questions and things such as that. I understand there could be some challenges with that. Some companies may say, I don't want to share my issues out in public. Everybody listening. The challenge for us has been in that regard is, again, has been staffing. If we pull our analysts into robust pre-application consultations multiple times for multiple hours a week, many days a week. Here we're taking them away from doing the licensing. We're taking them away from doing AC work. We have we have 9 analysts right now, and they all are working multiple projects at once. And so the folks that people want to talk to usually are the analysts who are doing the flight safety analyst work, doing the system safety work, doing the flight safety systems, et cetera. And so we're trying to figure out a way to break some of those folks away from time to time. It's certainly something that I'm intending to do. I want to put a little bit more emphasis on pre-application consultation, particularly in the area of flight safety analysis, which is very important, which means we're going to have to make a little sacrifice. We're going to have to bring analysts away from time to time to consult with companies, particularly companies that are new to the process, haven't been here before. So we want to make sure that those companies really understand coming in the door what a good analysis looks like, compliance looks like. So we're going to have to pull some of those analysts from time to time to engage with issues. We're also making investments in the development of new tools like LEAPS. We've heard about that. That will improve licensing application processing efficiency. LEAP, as I mentioned, which is the Licensing Electronic Application Portal, is an important tool under development that will allow our evaluators to electronically accept, modify, exchange, and improve licensing materials under Part 450. It will also increase transparency of where operators are in the review process. We know this is something that industry deems important, we deem it important, and we're pushing hard to move forward and get LEAP. On an operational mode, we're pushing for minimal viable product, as we call it, and MVP. And we're hoping to get that set up as soon as we can. We're pushing, our schedule pushed a little bit to the right, but we're still working hard on that. We have high expectations for the tool. We won't release it until we are confident that it will be useful and effective in improving efficiency, license processing, and evaluations, making better file management, more transparent evaluation, and more efficient feedback and response mechanism. We refined our requirements and are in the process of hiring a new developer for LEAP partner in this complex task. Now on to Spark 450. We got asked about that a little bit last week as well. We're continuing to look at new ways to use transition to 450, and this is a critical part to that. We're very close to announcing the kickoff of Spark 450. The charter is drafted, and the process is being approved right now through the agency and the department. We plan to invite current and prospective launch reentry licensees who have experience with Part 450 to serve on the Spark. About 27 members will represent the wide views and interests of the commercial space industry, as well as interagency partners and observers. So this is a very important rulemaking committee. We understand how important it is. We are as eager as you are to get 450 underway. We announced it at our conference in February that we want to stand this up, and we're pushing as hard as we can to get things through. I am optimistic that we will get it kicked off this fall. I am very optimistic that we will. Again, we cannot wait to get this set up. Again, I want to go back to something I said earlier. I got a little bit of time to get on it. I got about 2 minutes. We understood when we stood up Part 450 at the onset. 450 was a record-breaking rule in terms of the time it took us to stand it up. We stood it up completely in about a 2-year period. Rulemaking takes about 5 years. It's a large rule, combined 4 regulatory parts in one, performance-based, and it changes the paradigm. Obviously with performance-based regulation, our industry now has to come in and show how it's going to comply versus us prescribing how the industry complies. We knew at the onset that 450 was not a perfect rule. I don't know that any rule is perfect, quite frankly. But we knew 450 wasn't perfect. We knew at the onset we had to come back to the table at some point and take another fresh look at 450. Not entirely, but we who had to fix some of the kinks and some of the challenges and problems that we're seeing. And we heard about reentry vehicles in some cases where there's some challenges there. We agree there's some things that we can get some good recommendations from COMSTAC in terms of things we should look at. Or we will look at those things and Spark absolutely. So said all that to say that, listen, we are eager to get to the table and take a fresh back and forth. We know some folks still have a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth from the previous Spark or ARC, Aerospace Week that we had on 450, which was abbreviated. It was only a couple of weeks for some, didn't last long. That won't be the case this time. We'll have ample time to sit down and have meaningful, progressive, productive discussions on what we need to do to fine-tune Part 450 forward. Again, we are looking forward to it. We are ready to do it. And again, my sense is we will have this committee stood up by fall, which, as I mentioned last week, we're still in the summer right now. Not quite to the fall yet, but we're pushing on that part. The last thing I want to do is, those are my prepared remarks. I just want to break them down a little bit. I want to thank both Karina Trees and Mike French for your leadership of this committee during this recent session. I think we've accomplished a lot. Appreciate again what you both have, your sacrifice, as well as all the members here. We know it's a sacrifice. We understand this is not your day jobs. There's other things that you all have to do, but it's a testament to your dedication and your commitment to seeing this industry succeed, and as well as seeing the FAA, supporting the FAA and doing its level best to support this industry. So I want to thank you, Karina, for your leadership. And I know you got some other things brewing now. I understand you're in a different part of the country, and I hope things are working well for you there. I trust that it is. But thank you for what you've done for us. You've been a very good friend of FAA, AST, and we will miss you on this committee. But you're not too far away. That's your phone number. We can reach out to you. And Mike, as always, saying excellent leadership, excellent support with Karina. I thought you guys made a very dynamic team, and brought very thoughtful ideas to the FAA. So appreciate what you've done for us, your role as the co-chair. So thank you as well. And with that, I'll conclude now. Thanks.
Okay, Colin, is it okay if you have a minute if folks have questions?
Sure.
Folks in the COMSTAC, any questions? Tell them while we have them here. See the folks online.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. You mentioned you got 158 people hired, 60% of staff are dedicated to licensing activities, and it said 9 analysts currently. Is that 9 across flight safety and system safety, or what do you mean by 9 total?
9 total. I may be wrong. I may be off those numbers. Is it? Where is that?
So we've got 9 flight safety analysts now. We have 2 we're hiring just in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be up to 11. We have 11 system safety analysts. So we have separate branches for that in our 200 division. But Colin was speaking specifically to the flight safety analysts.
9 flight safety analysts. System safety. So we have 3 branches. Within our analysis division, there's 3 branches: flight safety branch, system safety branch, and flight safety systems branch. So the 9 is flight safety analysis branch. That being said, there's additional system safety analysis, additional flight safety systems.
And do you expect, so out of 158 total employees in AST, you've got 22 on the analysis side. Do you expect that to grow? Do you have a need for it to grow further?
Yeah,
and what are the kind of growth plans for that?
Yeah, we're looking heavily at robusting our analysis team. So that's why the 25 budget request is so important. We need that additional staff. additional analysts support. We also need additional inspectors in some other places as well. But certainly, that's a big priority.
Is there anything the industry, academia, other government agencies can do to help you develop pipelines for those analysts?
Well, that's a good question. We sometimes, a lot of our analysts have come from the industry and other parts of the government. I like to say we borrow them from borrow analysts from Space Force, NASA, and they have their own challenges trying to keep analysts and such. I think the thing that we're working on hard is trying to develop pipelines with colleges and universities, emphasizing STEM, trying to get colleges and universities to look at curriculums that meet our needs in these areas. I want to talk to colleges and universities about what our needs are so they can shape their curriculums such that we can recruit from places and bring people in, have some sense of what we're looking for and what we need in these areas. So I think, it'd be great to partner with the industry to, again, help develop talent pool that we need. So we probably talk about that in detail, but I think this is an issue.
And we'll be talking about we'll be talking about a little bit this month. So one of the things we'll talk about. Right. Yeah. I don't know, any others? I was going to tell them just before you go, just what is so from a next COMSTAC, is any just sort of timeline how that kind of process on that?
When we're looking for.
Yeah, like is that just sort of, we expect to have an April meeting? Is that?
Yeah, it is. Yes, we look to convene our next COMSTAC in the spring, hopefully in the April timeframe. We're targeting for, we'll have some new members on that committee. We'll have new chair and co-chair, vice coach, new chair and co-chair. So we'll kick that off.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Colin. I appreciate it.
All right, next up on the agenda, we have invited a guest speaker from ASTM, our standards body that works all different kinds of activities. So please, where do you want? If you want to sit, or if you would like to stand at the podium, your choice.
I'll just sit here if that's okay. Hi, everybody. Nice a few faces. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you what's going on with ASTM F-47, Commercial Spaceflight Standards Committee. My name is Andrew Nelson. I'm the chair. And we also have with us Katerina, and she is our staff member from ASTM and keeps us on track. So why don't I start? Thank you for having us. What we're doing is all voluntary consensus-based standards. And it's very much like making the sausage, as people say. It's not pretty. It takes a long time, but hopefully at the end, we have good products that are available to us. And it's very much like a funnel. We start with lots of different ideas, and it takes a while, but eventually we start producing some pretty good products. So big picture, for those of you who don't know, ASTM International has been around for over 125 years. There are currently about 150, 148 active committees with a variety of different subcommittees and task groups that amount to over 2,000. There's currently 13,000 ASTM standards that are published and are actively maintained. Those get reviewed every 5 years for applicability. And ASTM standards are used across the board from very, very precise testing and validation and certification purposes, as well as a very high level guidance material. And it spans an amazing amount of industries. And a lot gets done with a very few people on paid staff. So I think, Kat, you have 4 committees, as well as she runs the Emerging Leaders Program. So very, very busy person. 35,000 members over around 150 countries. So, next slide. Who has the slides? There we go. Okay. So how does the standard get made? This is a very high level slide. It's sort of a reverse pyramid. You start at the bottom. There's a task group who develops the standard. It goes to a subcommittee where it gets voted on. It has to get consensus. It then goes up to a full committee like the F47, and then eventually it gets not a rubber stamp, but a final review by the broad-based committee on standards. Again, there's a lot of checks and balances to this. All members are of a task group and a subcommittee and a committee are classified based upon whether they are a user, general, some sort of specialist category, and there's only one vote at each level per company. So that also ensures that there's no specific individual company that might flood a committee and push through something that the broader industry would not like. So everyone has an equal voice. And then there's a balloting process. And if there's one negative vote, for whatever reason, the process stops, you review it clearly, you make a change, or if it's, obviously some comments come from areas we don't understand, and they might be ruled non-persuasive. But everything is very rigorously balloted and adjudicated. And then eventually, standards are published. Next slide. There we go. So the committee of F47 was formed originally in 2016 out of a recommendation from the Commercial Spaceflight Federation and other industry partners. Currently, we have about 120 members, and we have 9 subcommittees, which I'll review in a second. Principally, there are 5 primary committees and then some, I'll say, horizontal and management committees. We currently have 11 published standards, and there are 10 getting close to being published. We have a full committee meeting in person twice a year. The next one being October 10th in Orlando as part of a larger ASTM process. And these are full and open meetings, so if anyone would like to come, you're welcome to come to Orlando. Kat can give you all the information. So we also have monthly executive committee meetings. And we also have many task groups, working groups. They meet weekly, bi-weekly, etc. So there's always a rolling calendar. Next slide. So there are quite a number of stakeholders involved in F47. We have a variety of operators, space habitat providers, parts manufacturers, etc. Many of the names you recognize, some of them are here in the room, but there's a whole list. We have Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, etc. We even have Disney, Westinghouse, and a variety of others. We also have companies like Aerospace and Mitre Corporation that participate actively. We have many regulators involved, so we have very active participation from AST. Thank you very much, Kelvin. And Dan, I know you're supportive of this, and many others. And Jim Hatt in the back is our day-to-day representative. And we get quite a bit of hard work out of the AST group. We have people from COMSTAC who've been involved, NASA, NOAA, Department of Commerce, and many others. Many of the national airspace users come and participate with us, as well as spaceport operators, a significant amount of aerospace medical professionals, and other interested stakeholders. So we have quite a good representation, and we're very happy, but we always are onboarding new folks. We even have people who just join off the street. We've had a couple who come to us and said, oh, this sounds cool, and they're active ASTM folks from other committees, and they join and participate very well. So anyone can come. We have a lot of coordination with FAA and NASA and Department of Commerce. So with FAA, standards as an alternative means of compliance is a target that I think we're now getting toward much more and in a bigger way. One of the first ones will be a means of compliance, alternative means of compliance for mishap investigation and emergency response. So we've had a lot of good participation from various individuals. That was a user poll recommendation from industry. We've also
Is that where entry place the priority? I'm sorry,
that's great.
That's the priority.
Yeah, there was we go through a regular road mapping process, and it repeatedly came up several times as a top priority. So we've created a committee recently, and I'm actually chairing that one. So that's one of the ones that I'm. There was some discussion about some of the flight safety analysis things and the reentry issues that you discussed, but we know that your team was working on that diligently, and it was decided we were going to wait to see what came out of the process.
Yeah, I mean, flight safety analysis is an area I think that Lynn that could benefit from some standards development. I'm just curious as to what the interest is coming together and talking about it.
Yeah, I think there is interest. It's all about getting the right subject matter experts in the room. And so I know that there's a lot of participation in that topic in the Range Commanders Council, for example. And so there's some activity that is informing the larger industry coming from a few different sources. What we don't want to do is duplicate activity that's already going on, or we don't want to get ahead of something that may or may not be accepted to the regulators, and we focus specifically on compliance. But with NASA, there's a number of standards activities that they've been quite interested in. You'll see those on a list shortly. And they bring together people and experts, et cetera. And then we have active staff participation in the past from Commerce and those activities. We've reached out to Coast Guard and Space Force in the past. We haven't got as much participation from them as we want, but we're not going to give up. So, next slide. So our current status. As we came into this year, ASTM does have term limitations on certain officers. So there was a roll of officers. So Mike Lopez Alegria, who's our chairman for about 5 years, 6 years, rolled off. He's now part of the at-large executive committee. I went from vice chair to chair, and Chris Ferguson is now our current vice chair. So many of you know Fergie. We do a biennial review of the strategic road mapping priorities and then tag ups about every quarter. So we are just finishing that activity right now, and you'll see some of the early outcomes on a slide, which is a bit of an eye chart later, but I wanted you to be able to take it away with you. If you want to share these slides with the COMSTAC members, feel free. We'll see that slide in a minute. We've recently reestablished a committee, F47.02. We had undergone our own little internal reorganization a couple years ago and left that one as a placeholder. We've now identified it as unoccupied orbital vehicles and operations, focusing on ISAM and on-orbit operations and these sorts of activities. And then we have a new chairperson for that as well. A gentleman from Westinghouse's Space Group and former astrobotic senior engineer. Continuing prior work programs, some of the means of compliance initiatives, human spaceflight and medical standards, and voluntary safety reporting and space nuclear power. Those are the ones that come to us. I would call those as reverse inquiry, where people come to us and say, hey, we really need some standards. And so we say, great, who do you have to bring to the table? Who are the subject matter experts? And that one in particular is very interesting. And we also have another one, a whole initiative around space gloves, which I'll talk about. Next slide.
Go further on the voluntary safety reporting standards work. Is this for each internal company to have employees feel free to disclose safety issues?
Correct, yeah, so, you'll see here on this 11 published standards, we actually have one standard that was initiated and published, a couple years ago, which was, I'm trying to find it. Oh, there it is. Standard Guide for Classifying Safety-Related Events. So that's the first one we've had. That basically lays the groundwork for how do you describe various safety events for eventual reporting. When we first attempted to do a proper safety reporting standard, the industry just wasn't ready for it. So that's where we got, and it was a good first step. We're now working on a detailed standard which addresses the voluntary spaceflight safety information sharing processes, VSS ISP. And one of the big things that we are, and by the way, that standard should be in draft form, ready for industry review, either by the end of this year or in Q1 of 2025. It's going along quite well. Originally, we thought it wasn't going to happen until the end of the end of calendar year 25, but it made some incredible progress. One of the big issues for really having this implemented is a legal framework. Currently, as you know, Title 49 provides a safe harbor. Well, I guess maybe the lawyer would tell me if I use that word.
I'm not a lawyer.
Oh, you weren't?
But I didn't say it all it is.
Okay, very good. So, but provides a safe harbor for the aviation community to report. Title 51 does not have that. And so we've been discussing that for a number of years at ASTM and how to, ASTM doesn't have an ability to go to the bill with proposed legislation, mandate, you don't do that. But the Title 51 language is very important. And so there has been some draft language proposed in the discussions on this committee and prior. So when we get Title 51 language, I think that'll be a big enabler.
Andrew, are you able to tell us anything about the uptake and use of these standards?
So we don't track specifically, you know, who buys or who uses standards. However, you know, anecdotally, we do get a lot of positive feedback and suggestions for updates and change that sort of indicate that people are using them and considering them closely. But ASTM as a whole doesn't track the 13,000 standards and if they're being used by industry and references in papers and that sort of thing. But our anecdotal feedback is that many of them aren't being used.
You said many of them are.
Yeah. But the one that we do believe that the voluntary spaceflight safety information sharing process standard is going to be a good one that will be used.
So your sense is, and you said before, industry wasn't quite ready for the first pass. So the sense is now the industry is ready for.
Yeah, we do, and we sense that because of the active participation that we're seeing at that committee. It's being led by Oscar Garcia and Chris Ferguson, and there's quite a regular update as to their monthly meetings and feedback and information flow. So there's.
Hey, General Mercer has a question. General Mercer,
Yes, go ahead. Ed? Oh, General Mercer? You have a question?
Is it on mute?
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. We've been struggling with technical difficulties all morning trying to get in. We were able to hear Mr. Coleman's comments this morning, and so greatly appreciate that. I have a question and a couple of comments. The first is on the standards. Who actually enforces them, and how are they actually enforced?
Well, so these are voluntary consensus standards. at the base level, and so there is no enforcement mechanism. It's an industry consensus standard, so people support what they help create, and so the broader the industry participation is in the creation of the standards. Now, where enforcement comes into play is through OMB 119. The federal government is allowed to and encouraged to point at industry consensus standards as means of compliance in regulatory rulemaking and standard setting. And so should Kelvin's office wish to reference or define an ASTM standard in an advisory circular, then it becomes a compliance mechanism.
Okay, that's what I understood. And the issue I have, and I would submit to the group, I would submit that if you have standards that you have no way of truly enforcing, I think it's an exercise in futility, because the industry and the associated agencies, if it costs money and they don't have to live up to it, whether they were involved in setting the standards or not, is going to be moot. And in my view, those that they don't like, they're not going to comply with. If you're going to develop standards, in my view, you must also develop a method to enforce them. This is part of the problem, in my view, that we're struggling with as a community. So I just put that out there, food for thought. If you're gonna develop standards, you must also develop a way to enforce them, and then do that. So that's my 2 cents on that.
General Marsh, it's Mike Moses, just to maybe respond to that, right? I agree with you. This is the circular logic of things, right? The CSLA asked to put in voluntary standards as a measure of health to see if industry is ready for regulations, which would then be a method of enforcing standards. So you got to take the first step, right? So I certainly, we've been very active in the ASTM efforts here, but it is kind of a, where does it go next? And we are kind of stuck, right? We're seeing an uptick in participation, but there is a little bit of a roadblock there, right? Because they're not enforced. But on the flip side, if you start enforcing them, that's regulation, and they're meant to help steer. So I'm kind of speaking both in support and maybe a little bit of a counterpoint to what you're saying. I get you need enforcement of standards, but you also have to start writing them. And so I definitely applaud the efforts of ASTM to get standards written down. I think that's what part of the next part of COMSTAC is. How do you turn those standards into active regulations?
Okay, I wholeheartedly agree and applaud the agency and ATM for this work. Wholeheartedly. It needs to be done. But again, if you can't figure out how to enforce it, it's an exercise in futility, and we're wasting our time. So I'll leave it at that. I cite for you an example, the struggle we're having. I heard Mr. Coleman talk about the Part 450 and the work that's going on that. And it's complicated, and they've come a long way with 450. But the bottom line is, when you're done, whenever it's done, and you're ready to fully implement 450 and execute it, if the agency does not take a regulatory a position as a regulator and drive other federal agencies as well as industry to comply with 450, again, it's an exercise in futility, because other agencies will come, whether it's DOD or NASA or anybody else, and they're going to say, well, yeah, I don't care what 450 says. Here are my rules that you must comply with, industry. So you must comply with 450, and you must comply with my rules, which I think 450 is designed to try to get away from. So I just, again, I don't want to, be the doomsdayer here, but we got to open our eyes and start taking these things on if we want to make a difference in the work that's being done. My 2 cents.
Well, yeah. Well, the next step in any consensus industry standard development is the adoption of those industry consensus standards by the various authorities who have jurisdiction over enforcement of rules and regulations.
Well, actually,
So-
Andrew, it's the adoption by the operators.
By the operators
The
themselves.
next step.
Yeah, yeah,
And
correct.
I know, Phil, if you want to weigh in here, but the entire purpose of consensus standards is many times to be in lieu of regulation. So I don't want to miss the point here. And that's not to say one is better than the other, but particularly in a flexible performance-based regime like Part 450, if there are consensus standards that are then adopted by the industry in regular course, and AST puts in advisory circulars that these are qualified means of compliance, this is why we are undertaking this exercise.
Exactly. And I was trying to say the same thing you just said, Matt, which is eventually,
That's it.
sorry,
Please finish
George.
your thought.
No, I was done.
Now, Matt makes a great point, and I will add that the other benefit of industry developed consensus-based standards is the rapidity with which they're able to be updated, as opposed to rulemaking processes for regulation. So they serve a really valuable purpose in situations where regulation is not yet warranted.
But not to say the FAA can't evaluate the change, so there will be that. But FAA participation in the committee is essential to ensure there's more streamlined approach so that you're not producing standards that are unusable.
Completely agree. Yeah, and by the way, excellent participation from AST staff on the committees. And so, like I said, I'll thank you again, Kelvin, for your support, and Jim's doing a great job, and Eric Sherman, who's all over it. So we have a lot of good participation.
I do have a question as to how this process and the standards that result from it differ from, say, what ISO produces.
Yeah, so we've actually taken a very keen approach in our road mapping to make sure that we don't have duplication of effort. So for example, we've invited ISO, we have a liaison subcommittee where we've had ISO and the various chairs and sub-chairs, SC13 and a variety of others come in and say what they're doing. And we present our work program, and we've had others, AIAA and other standards bodies come through. So we all try to play nice in the sandbox and not duplicate.
Is that the end of your question? Yes, sure. Okay. So ISO is one country, one vote, right? And ASTM is, as Andrew mentioned earlier in the presentation, is anybody can come to the table and participate. So all the individual companies can also have a vote, where if we were participating as the United States, all of those individual companies have to come to one agreement as to what it's going to say, which is obviously a very different approach. And ours is also a bottom-up approach, where theirs is a top-down approach. So very different way of producing standards. And also, as he said, we're trying to avoid duplication of anything. So right now, from our understanding and sort of how we've been liaisoning, we are human spaceflight focused, and theirs is space systems, I believe. So we're gonna see what they're working on in October. I think they have a meeting here on the 25th. So we'll make sure that that's still the case, and we're not scope creeping at all, and that we're kind of all staying in our.
I know we hit you with some questions, maybe it'll just quick, I don't know if there's, closing thoughts.
Yeah, we'll go to the next slide real quick, see what I've got here. And then this is just currently standards development in the pipeline. I point out there's 3 standards that are close to being published. For lunar spaceflight standard, a good example of something that's come over the transom. And in the NASA commercial space flight mentality, they wanted to have these performance and specified test standards for gloves, which is the most challenging part. At the bottom, the very bottom one is the standard guide for the voluntary spaceflight information sharing, so that's ongoing. But these are the ones that are currently being developed. And next slide. I think this one's the eye chart. This is the one you can take home with you, but this is sort of some high-level prioritized future work. It's evolving, but we're about ready to wrap that one up with the updated work program.
Great, I think we missed one. Karen, I think Karen had a question. Oh, Karen, let me get you.
Yeah, hey, thanks. I'm so sorry not to be there today, and thanks for the opportunity to participate over Zoom. Andrew, I just want to go back to one of General Mercer's points that I think is an important thing to note. And you, in your last slide, it was the visual, I think a good visual clue to this, or cue, sorry. And that was his comment, a very important one about, the overlapping authorities that we have. And one of the opportunities that these standards offer is that the standards could be standards that could apply to satisfy various agencies' interests, or to comply with various agencies' requirements or regulations. So a standard that's developed, for example, under ASTM's efforts here with F-47 could be a standard that could work to satisfy NASA's requirements for human spaceflight activities, as well as future regulations of those activities. For ground systems, maybe a ground system activity that would be both, satisfy the range's interests as well as FAA's interests. So I think that's an important, it's not the solution by any means, but I do think it goes to this fact that we as an industry have to face oversight by various agencies that could, in some cases be duplicating oversight of the same activity, and the standards can help with that to some degree.
Exactly, yeah, and I fully agree. A good example of those space globe standards that they want to use is their basically go-to performance specifications, which could also then serve as a regulatory means of compliance should AST start to regulate spacesuits and human spaceflight safety in that regard. And also at pulling back, our committee has sort of gone through, we're entering into a third phase. The first phase was there was some learn how to do standards, and there were some urgent needs that the industry wanted to pursue, and so we produced a few standards. And then there was a concern about the learning period ending, and we cross-referenced the FAA's recommended guidelines for human spaceflight safety into and mapped into 5 specific standards, which we've been developing. One of them being crew safety, which is published now, human factors, software, et cetera. So those are under development. And then sort of phase 3 is now branching out into other areas, and including the sort of the non-human space flight, just regular space things. So it is a very robust program, and many of them are, as you were saying, Karen, can apply across different groups. And a good example of that is the nuclear standards that have come together through a working group that started, I guess, with FAA, DOD, DOE, and a lot of other alphabet letters groups. And they are doing a bang-up job producing the first set of nuclear standards for spaceflight systems, small fission and that sort of thing. But that's an example of what you're saying, Karen, where multiple agencies can utilize the standard for certain purposes. I think there might be one more slide. Well, I just went over this. This is our priorities, which I just described, and then the next one are our contacts. So, is there any further questions of me? I'm at the end of my time.
Do you mind if I say one thing? While we have this great audience, can you go back, I think it's 3 slides. One of our top priority items is on one more slide. It's at the very top here. It's we're looking for a technical contact for spaceflight participant safety and emergency training. We need somebody to help write this guide. Our technical contact has recently needed to move on to something else. And this continues to come up as a high priority item, both through industry contacts and through the committee. So if any of you have somebody within your companies that you'd be willing to lend to the committee to help drive this work, we would love to hear from you.
I think Matt wants to do it himself.
I wouldn't recommend.
Thank you.
No, we can maybe someone is busy.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Andrew. Any more questions? Well, this is wonderful. Thank you very much.
I do have a question. I wonder, I asked the question earlier about the standards you all are working on. And the question is priority. What are the priorities of this committee? Are the priorities of the committee lined up with priorities of the industry right now? We are certainly, space flight is something that's important. probably probably a little bit more down on the scale if you really compare it to the reports and implementation department. So I question, or I want to know, is ASTM's focus aligned with the most pressing issues of the day of the industry in terms of the standards development? Where is the energy and the time and focus going? And is it lined up again with where industry is right now, where we are right now?
So we have to rely on the feedback that we get from our industry participants. We have active participation from the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, certainly your organization, but we also have SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Boeing, Northrop, Blue Origin, very active participant. Many of the spaceflight companies are actively involved, and we've just gone through this several month biennial review of the road mapping process. We've had a number of votes and priority votes, calls, and they've been participating. So I think based upon that is, yes, we are reflecting what the industry is asking for and their priorities. So certainly the leadership, like myself, we don't drive, this is going to be our work program. It's very much a collective discussion.
We work with is going forward.
Yeah, and what people are saying are their priorities and what their needs are. And I think at a high level, those big five that we were talking about earlier, the crew safety, the system design standards for vehicles and spacecraft, human factors, software, the work that is going on with the software standards, I think is going to be fundamental groundbreaking. It's incredible. And so we're actually working those very, very strong.
And can I just add, I think the reason for that, it does sound a little strange, I agree with you, that given the challenges for 450, but I think the reason industry is aligned on these goals is to begin the process of establishing best practices and standards as it relates to human spaceflight operations, which are kind of down the road. Whereas the challenges we're all kind of experiencing with Part 450, there are lots of different venues to shop through that, including directly with AST, the future spark, et cetera. So I think that's why it may seem a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned earlier, there was this, about 2 or 3 years ago, we had a really deep discussion about, do we want to put in the time to create an alternative means of compliance for flight safety analysis specific to the reentry? And it was decided that there was a lot of work that a lot of those discussions needed to start with your team, and because they're the ones who had to say, yeah, it was going to work. And there were some potential proprietary discussions that had to occur inside our group that people potentially didn't want to embark upon 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And so, but I'm getting the sense that as things come together, that there are a lot of those issues are getting put by the wayside because we're trying to put some means of compliance standards to you for consideration through AST.
I think the other question that came up earlier is an important one. Is there a way for us to collect data to understand the utilization of these standards? Are folks actually using these standards? How are they being leveraged? I don't know how we collect that information. I think that is important information to somehow get hold of it. Yeah. I don't understand how we provide that to solve.
We can certainly poll our committee, but we're not going to get sort of the outside people who order ASTM standards off the internet. But it sounds like something that, if you have a research group that is aligned, whether I know you do a lot of work at Ohio State and some of the others, it almost sounds like a really good university.
I also think, Andrew, on that point, sorry to jump in, but standards that ASTM puts out are used throughout this industry on a daily, hourly, probably minute by minute basis, right? So they're integrated into vehicle design, vehicle build, operations, ground, all of these things, ground systems, software already, because they're not unique to human spaceflight activities. They're relative to industrial activities, to any kind of ground activities, or aerospace activities at large. So I think it's so I think if you asked companies, do you use ASTM standards, the answer is going to be universally yes, and it's going to be in a great, to a great deal. So sorry to jump in there, but I just want to.
No, so that's a really good point. I just had last week, anecdotal from my life. We're doing a piece of equipment for us in my day job, and we needed a specific vibration spectrum in order to test this piece of equipment, and it was in another ASTM standard, not F47. And then in the same conversation, we had 3 other ASTM standards pop up for steel and aluminum and various other things. So they're applied across the industry, and ASTM F47 is getting to the point where now, after 4 or 5 years of development, we're getting to the point where some of those standards are actually coming out that are specific to the spaceflight industry.
I think maybe that's something for our, the list of the next COMSTAC, right? I think the idea of F47 specific uptake can be important as we think about the actual role and how that fits into a standard-based framework. It may line up with some of the Spark activity as well that we're talking about more broadly.
I do want to clarify something. This is a F47 standards development committee. The work of the committee is to develop, this is a key word, voluntary consensus industry standards. This is not the government leading the effort to develop standards. This is the industry itself developing standards for itself that it can voluntarily utilize or not. The government's job is not to force or enforce utilization of these standards. So get back to what General Mercer was talking about, who's enforcing this. It is not the government. It is not our role or our job to step in and require companies to utilize these voluntary industry consensus standards. So I was very clear about that. Now, we can incorporate standards by reference into regulations. Now, we don't have that construct under Title 51 standards, but Title 49 on the aviation side, you'll see oftentimes standards are incorporated into a regulation by reference, which is fine, but we haven't gotten that yet to that place yet on the Title 51 side. But if those standards were incorporated by reference, then you have a mechanism by which the government could enforce, if you will, why standards. I just want to be clear about that point, so we don't understand. Well, now we have participation on the committees. We don't run the committees. We're not the head honcho of the committees, but we lend technical expertise to aid in the conversation. It is important, though, I think, for these committees to understand the regulator's perspective. I think Brian made the point. You don't want to go down the road of developing consensus standards at the end of the day. We conclude, well, they really can't be used as a means of compliance and stuff. So it's good to have the regulator at the table to lend those views, if you will, as to what's useful, what and how they might be leveraged in a regulatory framework to help the industry, to help the committee as well.
Definitely agree. Yeah, it's voluntary for you if you choose to put them into an advisory circular. You're not required to do that. Parts of the FAA and parts of other parts of the government do that in their advisory circulars. And if we produce a standard that approve alternative means of compliance, put it as one-page AC and that's what Well, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. I have to run to the airport.
Can I comment on that?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Colvin. I appreciate your thought on that. I think through this discussion, though, we've kind of overlapped a couple of things or confused a couple of things. The first is the process. We started talking about the process as if the process itself was being challenged. That was certainly not my view. I think the process is great, going out and getting the voluntary standards established and so forth. No problem with that. I think the FAA has done a superb job of guiding that. The committees have done a great work at identifying what industry standards are. So I don't want to confuse the issue with that. The process, I have no issue with, none whatsoever. I think this was marvelously done. Where I draw an exception is how those standards will be driven to be complied with. If you have a standard that can be ignored, there will be some that will ignore it. And they will ignore it in industry because of business requirements. They may do it because of profit requirements. They may do it because of other challenges that stresses that industry partner. Having standards, no matter how they are developed, that cannot and will not be enforced is an exercise in futility. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. French. I have to run to the airport, but I think my contact details are available.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much.
Airport's gone, really, just kidding.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Next, we transition to the COMSTAC brief out to the two tasks that I assigned the group on July 16th. So the first task is the research options on commercial space transportation, standing up a research alliance made of both government, industry, and academia to foster research and development. This was a continuation of the last meeting's taskings to come to some resolution. So the task 2 is strategic views on improving AST workforce pipelines and maintaining employees' technical knowledge base. So looking forward to hearing the committee's work that they've done since the summer. And later on, we're going to transition to a discussion on future taskings. So I feel it's very important that we have around the room discussion to come up and brainstorm a list of topics that's important to the industry for FAA to task COMSTAC. So this is going to help build our list, our COMSTAC list later this afternoon, and then for these two taskings, over to you, Mike. Look forward to hearing what committees come up with.
All right, great. And so just for folks at COMSTAC, so why don't we start with task 1, and then this is one that I think has recommendations. Georgia, if that's right. See how we are there, and then maybe see where we're on timing, and see if we take a break and before we get to task 2. But maybe we'll get started here. George, should I hand it over to you on this one? Sure.
Does this work well then with somebody advancing slides along the rest? We have it. So the agenda, just going to talk about what the task assignment was, give a little background. There's been a lot of progress since we talked about this subject in April. Get everybody up to date on there and then have some observations and recommendations. So first of all, the task as it was assigned to the group was to research options on commercial space transportation, standing up a research alliance made up of government, industry, and academia to foster research and development. And this would be a follow-up to the Commercial Space Transportation Center of Excellence and provide a recommended path to implementation that includes potential funding, structure, and governance. So a little bit of background next. The FAA Center of Excellence, I think most of you are familiar with that, established in 2010, had 10 different member universities and 36 industry partners. It was funded at about $1 million a year for 10 years with the requirement that every federal dollar be matched 1-to-1 by industry or universities. It ended in 2022 after reaching the end of its planned lifetime. So it was always planned to be a 10-year program, and then COVID stretched it out a little bit. But the concern is that there was no replacement mechanism that was put forward at the time to allow academia and others to understand what AST's needs were and to be able to share the research that was ongoing. So next chart. The Center of Excellence itself was very broad on purpose to cover lots of different areas related to the industry, including operations, vehicles, and human effects, and then social sciences, and including things like the market and projections for demand and so forth. So it was very broad, and there were a lot of different areas that ended up being investigated. And I think the consensus was it was a very successful program, even though the funding for that was relatively modest. So just to review the original recommendation, which was put on the table in April. Next chart, please. This recommendation was for the Secretary of Transportation to competitively award a cooperative agreement to a university, nonprofit, or not-for-profit organization that would establish a consortium that would operate this commercial spaceflight research alliance. And the suggestion was that the agreement should be for a 10-year period, and just to put a mark in the sand, appropriate initial value of the award should be on the order of 30 million. Obviously a lot greater than what ASP has devoted to research in the past, and a significant fraction, as Matt and others pointed out, of the current AST budget. During our discussion, there was a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty as to exactly what was being proposed. Is this the right time and so forth? I wanted to just review some of the questions that came out from that discussion. If we could go to the next chart. Some of those questions, and I may not have captured all of them, but the ones that I particularly took note of included, why does this need to be a nonprofit? And if it is a nonprofit, why does it need to be tied to DOT? Wouldn't NASA or Commerce be better choices than DOT? And then into the nitty-gritty, who would populate the group and where would the expertise come from? How do we transition the research to industry? And then finally, are we putting the cart before the horse as we talk about specific durations and funding levels for this? So I'd like to try to address the questions at the start and then talk about the progress that has been made since that time. So stepping through those on the next chart. Why a nonprofit? So as this was looked at earlier, it was recognized that there are a lot of different ways that you could implement a research program like this. You could keep things as they are today, an ad hoc program. Government is doing some research, industry is doing some research, universities are doing some research, but it's not collaboration, it's not coordinated. And as a result, you're going to have some gaps, you're going to have some overlap, and it's not a very efficient way to run an industry-wide research program. You could have a new government program with budget and management and so forth. Certainly nothing wrong with that. You could have a public-private partnership or an FFRDC that stands up a research effort. And again, these can all work for some areas. Finally, you could have a non-government, nonprofit program. And as we looked at pros and cons for all these different approaches, the conclusion was any of those could be used, but the non-government, nonprofit has the potential to be faster, more innovative, less costly, more inclusive, and more collaborative than some of the other approaches. So in the discussions I've been having with folks, look like that would be a very good way to proceed. So next chart, please. Then the question came up, if it is a nonprofit, why are we talking about having DOT do anything? Why can't the nonprofit just go do it? And of course they could, but even if you have a nonprofit responsible for managing this research alliance, the the government needs to be a part of that if you want it to be fully successful. Government has its needs, it has its insights, it has its expertise. Just to attempt to run something separate from the government, I'm not sure would be the best approach. And so, why DOT? And again, it could be other organizations, obviously, within the government, but Title 51, again, going back to the Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act of 2004, puts down the marker, a critical area of responsibility for the Department of Transportation is to regulate operations and safety of the emerging commercial human spaceflight industry. And doesn't say how to do that, and got the learning period and other constraints and opportunities to go ahead, but that would be certainly a reason in my mind for DOT to be involved with research in commercial space transportation. Next. So wouldn't NASA or DOC be better? Maybe so. They have a lot of expertise, a lot of experience doing some of these things. However, in fairness, neither NASA nor Commerce have taken any action to create this commercial spaceflight research lounge. We don't see one out there today. And at least in my opinion, and on committee, the ideal approach would be, instead of having competing ones, or some people do it and some people don't, let's talk about having a collaborative research alliance where DOT, NASA, and Commerce, and other entities all are invited to participate, in addition to industry and academia. So that would be certainly my vision on as to how the best approach would work. Next chart then. So where would we get the expertise? Who would participate in this? The vision is it would be a collaborative effort. You've got folks from government, industry, academia. Ideally, it could be international partners as well, with the appropriate care for ITAR and other constraints, obviously. And the participants themselves would come from the ranks of scientists, engineers, astronauts, physicians, researchers, flight controllers, flight planners, policy experts, market analysts, depending on the particular topic that was being looked into. Next chart. How does the research get transitioned to industry? Well, that's one of the beauties of having this type of alliance, because industry would ideally be part of the research ongoing. It would be participating both in sharing needs in terms of what research needs to be accomplished, and actually doing the research itself along with the other participants, the other stakeholders in government and academia. Same time, you do want to have some kind of structure, and so it would make sense to have regular conferences and workshops to talk about the progress and the difficulties and challenges that have been encountered as the research is going forward, and to share the results. And then finally, written reports to document those observations, findings, and recommendations. So next chart, are we putting the cart before the horse? My response is not anymore, we're not, because there's been a lot of progress since April. So let's move to that. Specifically, I'm talking about the fact that a non-government, non-profit organization has now been stood up with the primary purpose of operating a commercial spaceflight research alliance. So let's talk about an example of recent developments then. Next chart.
Well, George, can you say more about that? Can you say more about what's been already stood up?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to
That's where you're going. Okay.
Next chart. It is the HRPC, which stands for the Human Research Program for Civilian Spaceflight. Next chart. The mission of that entity is basically to do what can to create a safe and healthy environment for civilians to live and work in space. Next chart. A lot of words for the vision. It's on the website, you can look at it later, but the basic flavor is we want a collaborative ecosystem. We want to focus on research and risk assessments, leveraging artificial intelligence, predictive modeling. You want to have ethical standards. You want to have civilian training and development for countermeasures, and look at what can we all bring to the table to do the right thing for identifying risks and then coming up with countermeasures or ways to mitigate those risks that have been identified. So next chart. HRPC has now been incorporated as a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, a 501c3 in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And the basic principles are all industry parties, government, industry, academia are welcomed and encouraged to participate. And the focus is on research and data sharing, not on regulations. This is not trying to develop regulations. It's collaborative in nature and international in scope. Next chart. So, who are the guys that put that together? I confess, I'm one of them. We had a bunch of folks who were very interested in this topic and wanted to see some progress. So, the founders include Dr. Michael Schmidt, who is really involved with this type of research for NASA, for the military, for academia, for industry, in many different ways, and right up on the latest state of the art. Mike Marsh has a lot of experience in academia. He's a former dean and professor from Syracuse. He also worked with large government research programs. Mark Shellhammer used to be the chief scientist for NASA's Human Research Program, which is similar, but their focus is just on the research that needs to be conducted to enable deep space exploration for NASA astronauts, not civilians who fly to space. And then Mary Cole, many of you may know, she was a special advisor to Kevin O'Connell at Commerce, and a lot of expertise in entrepreneurial space and nonprofits. So, next chart. I want to talk a little bit more about where is the expertise coming from. It's not just from the founders. We had an excellent example of how a non-government nonprofit can bring together interested parties in a productive way with a workshop that was held on this topic, development of a research program for civilian spaceflight, even before the 501c3 was stood up. This took place at Oklahoma State University in January, and we had about 250 folks participate. About half of those were in person and half were virtual. And I'd like to share with you some of the entities that were involved in that. So next chart. This chart includes some of the universities that participated in it. And just to rattle off a few names because the print is small enough. Oklahoma State University, Baylor, Johns Hopkins, UTMB, Stanford, Oxford. We had the Mayo Clinic, Rice University, UC San Diego, Florida Institute of Technology. A lot of interest around the world from universities in this subject who are participating and providing comments and feedback to the proposed research program on this topic. Next chart. How about government entities? We had NASA, ESA, JAXA from Japan, DLR from Germany, the Brazilian Space Agency, the National Space Research Agency from Nigeria. We had the FAA, the Air Force, HHS, the National Cancer Institute, NIH. We had a congressman who was a committee chair in this area, and several staffers from both the House and the Senate. Next chart. How about industry? So, who are the key players in human spaceflight? We have them there. SpaceX, Boeing, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, Sierra Space, plus Redwire, Space Tango, Astro Access, the NASCAR Center, some of you may be familiar with, and a number of other entities from around the country and around the world. Next chart. FFRDCs, we had Aerospace, MITRE, and RAND, and we had groups like the Space Foundation and associations like the SATCOM Industry, Global Spaceport Alliance, Spaceports, and Aviation Week. So my point in showing all this was not that everybody's standing by and got their sleeves rolled up, ready for the go-ahead, but rather these are the folks from the community, not from the government. This wasn't a government gathering. It wasn't a guarantee of a government contract or government funding. This is important work, and we care about this, and we want to help. We want to participate. So I think that's a good example of the kind of collaboration that we can expect as we move forward. So next chart. In terms of an organizational structure, now that we've got the Human Research Program for Civilian Spaceflight stood up as an official 501c3, we are able to accept government grants and grants from foundations and investors and donors and benefactors. You can take in membership fees. We've got a board of directors. That's the initial 5 founders. And as we go forward then, we're in the process right now of meeting with stakeholders. Okay, you said you were interested back at the workshop. Do you want to play? Do you have some research needs? Would you like to be one of the research entities? Do you have interest in putting some resources on the table? Can you provide some funding that would go towards this? So those are ongoing. We've got a huge response so far just from the website, and the emails and things have gone out. Over 100 folks coming back say, hey, we want to hear more, talk to us. But as we identify those research efforts that are highest priority for the community and the potential funding levels that are possible, we then anticipate filling out a board of advisors and potentially having some paid staff to keep things going, and then can address some of those blocks shown in blue, which are intended to be somewhat like the Center of Excellence pillars, if you will, ranging from more of a job on this space traffic research and so forth, or vehicles, point-to-point transportation, the human space flight, which is sort of the rationale for the initial organization here. Spaceports or policy and market research, all those are possible with the same collaborative structure that is being operated through a consortium alliance. And then eventually, of course, we would love to have membership at some level from government, industry, universities, associations, and even individual members. Next chart. This is not, we've got some just slides we're talking to today, but there's some real meat here. What was reviewed at that workshop in January was about a 100-page document of a research program that talked about what data do we need, what would we envision in terms of a process to collect the specimens and to establish databases and all those kinds of things. And so that is available on the website that is shown on the slide there, and you can look at that later if there's particular interest in this topic. Next chart. The overall research as laid out in that program has 4 different tracks, and just to give you a flavor for some of that. Next chart. First track is basically trying to set sort of a baseline. Here's the data we'd love to get from everybody who goes to space in terms of measurements, so that you can build up that database with lots of data points to enable you to make observations and conclusions and hypotheses. And there's all kinds based on the advanced science and technology that's available today that hasn't always been around. Next chart. The second track says, okay, we've got all this data. We want some of the researchers to be able to have a mechanism to say, I've got a hypothesis. I think I see something here, and we need to study it, or I want to try a potential countermeasure or treatment or medication and see if that helps. And so there's a way to do that. We're looking at areas, whether that's gravity transitions or the effect of radiation or distance from Earth on psychology, all those kinds of things. Next chart. Track 3 then is more the facilities and the structures and the processes that are used, whether it's artificial intelligence or whatever, things like food and nutrition, again, biorepositories where you can store samples. One have an institutional review board in terms of ethical testing that is done on people, and reporting systems, all those kinds of things. Next chart, track 4 again, just to make sure it ties back to COMSTAC and commercial space in general. A lot of what I've been talking about so far specifically has to do with human health and the effect on the human body. But again, this same structure with collaboration, involvement, and a nonprofit approach can also be applied to other areas. And so track 4 acknowledges there's other potential research areas ranging from vehicles to operations to ECLIS, sustainability, debris mitigation, point-to-point, workforce development, policy, market, and so forth, that could be used with this same process of collaboration to have the stakeholders engaged on topics that they think are important and that they have either expertise to contribute, data to contribute, or resources to put towards the cause. So next chart, I mentioned we just started having the one-on-one engagement with potential stakeholders. So if there's any of you that are interested, certainly let me know. We'll put something on the schedule and answer your questions and see if there's something we can do. But one of the initial items of feedback that we've gotten was from NASA, and so I wanted to specifically share this. They pointed out the mission of HRPC is both inspiring and essential, and quote, we are eager to contribute our expertise and resources to support the 4 key research tracks. So that was fantastic feedback to get. We've got a meeting scheduled to go in. What does that mean? How much funding? How much data? How do we do that? How do we work together? But that's a start. We expect to have similar conversations with other stakeholders in the weeks and months ahead. So next chart. That has brought us with sort of a large and long, lengthy introduction now to some observations and recommendations. So I'd like to share those with you now. In terms of an observation, given the rapid pace of activity, we believe there's an urgent need and opportunity for government, industry, and academia to collaborate in performing research through a commercial spaceflight research alliance. And a nonprofit organization, HRPC, has now been established in order to meet that. So that's an observation. It's factual. Moving towards the recommendations then. Again, let me quickly go through that, and then we can pause and talk about questions and where we want to go as a COMSTAC. The first recommendation would be that the Office of Commercial Space Transportation should engage with nonprofit organizations like HRPC on a regular basis to share research needs and priorities and to receive status updates on research accomplishments. And just as a side note, to ensure project oversight and appropriate involvement, an FAA representative could serve as a member of the HRPC Board of Advisors, if that is of interest, or could participate on an ad hoc basis. Next recommendation then would be for the Office of Commercial Space Transportation to request increased funding for commercial space transportation research activities while ensuring that it has the resources needed for both licensing and safety inspections. It can't come out of that pot, we recognize that. But it needs to be asked for. Airports gets it, aviation safety gets it, air traffic gets it, other parts of government get it. Commercial space needs it too. As research funding does become available or can be made available, the office should consider providing research grants to HRPC to address its high priority research needs. So if there's some things that you think are important, put some money on the table, either in general to operate this consortium or specifically to meet specific research needs as you perceive them, or both. And then finally, recommendation number 3 is, given that we've got a nonprofit already stood up, we believe that we should move forward right away and initiate some collaboration. So, happy to answer any particular questions, comments, pushbacks, and then we can talk about whether COMSTAC wants to take some action on those proposals.
All right, thank you, George. Thanks to the committee, I know that worked on this and the efforts behind it. Why don't we open it up here for just, so, you know, sort of, we presented here with some recommendations we could make to COMSTAC here to vote on. But sort of let's discuss that. You know, welcome feedback on that. Just look around the room here or online to see if anyone wants to kick that off.
Can we go back to the third recommendation? Sorry, I was taking notes, I forgot.
So the third one is, let's get going.
Oh, is that, okay.
And you can obviously combine that, but I mean, wanted to make the point that this is not, well, let's come back in 6 months and talk about this some more. I think we've gotten all the pieces. If this is something that meets the needs, if it answers the original tasking, let's get going.
Yeah. And other, just want to see other, anyone online, questions or comments? I'll jump in for myself, George. I mean, so I'll just sort of, my take is, for myself, I mean, I'm comfortable with recommendation, the first bullet of 1 and 2. I'm a little uncomfortable, having been a benefactor of the research program in the past. I just know there's quite a bit of others out there that are in this area, you know, and so, you know, just in my view, I'm supportive of sort of the first bullet that I think is an ordinary fund. I think it should be, we should get funding. I'm a little uncomfortable just sort of from the COMSTAC to say that where the money should go. So, and that's not, please don't take that as a comment about the work of HRPC, right, or its intent. It's just more, I think, from a, you know, knowing there's others out there that would be interested in this kind of program, I just feel like that's probably where my sense is. So just, you know, I'll throw that out there from my distinct.
So, you know, again, fair enough. And as we talked about this and looked out there, I could not find any other nonprofit entity that has this as their goal to try to provide this service. If there are, an ASD would like to either support them, meet with them, give money to them, go for it. But here's one that we've got as a starting point, and I think ideally, instead of having competition or multiple things that could be either doing the same thing or missing some things, or you have to decide they're both doing good work, which should we support? Let's work together. So that's the intent, but I certainly understand your perspective on it.
Certainly if the FAA were to come up with money that was for a specific purpose, for specific research, and they decided they wanted to put it out for bid, to see, I mean, HRPC could be one of, and others could bid as well. The concern here is now, you know, if you look at recommendation 2, is starting to find money to support these research activities to begin with, let alone prioritizing then what those research topics would be. And looking at organizations like, for instance, HRPC to help establish what those priorities are could be of assistance if, back to recommendation number 1, they participated and helped set what those priorities were as a member on the project.
I'm sorry, I dropped my phone. Just to comment on your comment, Mike, I saw the recommendations here, not in particular with respect to funding, but with respect to getting involved in an established consortium and exchanging ideas and recommending areas of research. So I think the funding item is maybe a recommendation for down the road if this consortium, HRPC, as a committee chooses to pick up the priorities that the FAA brings to the table at this point. Is that right? Did I kind of get that right?
I think so. Just a little bit of history for those who have been watching this for a long time. The FAA actually did put out a request for information way back in 2018, I believe, that basically said, we're thinking of having a research alliance. who might be interested in operating that alliance, not doing the research, but operating the alliance. And this seems to be becoming a more common way of doing research. Commerce has done it, DARPA did it, NASA has done it. The government sets up this nonprofit or not-for-profit or university entity that operates a consortium, and then they might put some more money on that just to keep the wheels running, and then open up to other government agencies. You know, we've got some things going on here. You know, if you see anything on the Chinese menu that looks good, feel free to fund that or to support it in some way. So, yeah, this is one way to get some research done. Right now, ASD does not have any way for industry or academia to know what's on your mind and to help you with that. So here's a structure that you could use if it meets your needs.
So I think, can I jump in here? George, this is really great. And I think that what the HRPC is attempting to do is a very exciting group of tasks and very ambitious. And I do think that you're right to reference, some of the activities that have happened through consortiums and other government agencies. I guess, and I think there's I started as I was looking through and listening to your charts, and especially, what you were just saying, which I think is a really important point to make about what the need is. So what's the problem to be solved, so to speak, and what could be impactful in the near term. And so one of the things that I think, a point that I thought was really resonated is one, a venue for a means by which FAA AST can communicate its research needs, right? And they did put out an RFP, and we haven't had, as far as I know, no progress on that, but correct me, somebody, if I'm wrong, Kelvin, others. So one, a means for them to communicate their research needs. And then two, the idea of COMSTAC advocating for there to be some amount of funds to be put towards those research needs. And then three, the idea that perhaps there is some kind of partnership or role for a consortium or an organization. I will say that, and this is just something that I feel like is ingrained in my advocacy around the commercial spaceflight industry, and that is to advocate for funding and advocate for opportunities, and to, I think, try not to be in a role where I'm trying to put my thumb on the scale for who would win, but create a playing field that is fair and that is funded and that is addressing a specific problem. So I share Mike's kind of, thought, like, are we being, we don't have everybody at the table to have this conversation about what the list of entities that might compete would look like. So while I do think that what HRPC is doing is really interesting and exciting, I am hesitant to have, a call out specifically versus creating a situation where HRPC might, very well be the absolute best entity to win if there were grant dollars available, and to engage to facilitate conversations with FAA AST to spread the word of the need for research. Does that, that's kind of where I come out on this. And then I guess I have a couple of questions that would be really helpful. When you look at that list, Kelvin, how do you think that an organization like this might help solve some of the key challenges that we're seeing with 450? When you think about how you prioritize your time, your team's time, is this the place where we should be having that conversation? It's similar to the conversation of like ASTM. And ASTM, we're talking about human spaceflight. We're not talking so much about 450 flight safety analysis, that kind of stuff. Is this that place? Is this, when you look at this, what do you see as the opportunity that best suits your team?
I would say, generally speaking, of course, research is important. Certainly applied research is important to our implementation of our 450, which is one of the major challenges of the day. Insofar as whether it's HRPC or some other group that we can tap into to one, share what our needs are from a research standpoint, and then have that group deliver to us applied research that we can incorporate into our regulatory oversight program. I mean, that's what's most helpful to us. So whether it's HRPC or some other group, I think that's essentially what we need. I do believe we need something like this. We don't have an outside group that we can go to say, hey, here's our resource needs, and help us there. We have a very, well, we have a research budget, but you know, a group like this can certainly force multiply and, you know, do a lot more than what we could do on our own, if you will. So I think that this is an important conversation that we're having, and I think we would benefit from something like this. I think that I'm interested in hearing what the COMSTAC's recommendations would be on this, but I think we need something along this line to support what we're trying to get done.
And Kelvin, along those lines, I guess, you know, a piece of any kind of funding that comes through is administering that funding. So, you know, one of the kind of recommendations gets the idea that AST would be granted some number of dollars, a significant amount more than what you've seen before, and that you would then have to have the staff and the administrative ability to oversee the, you know, the process of granting those funds. So, you know, issuing requests for proposals and then making a grant of funds, and or granting funds to an organization that you would then have oversight of that would then be operating under those funds, right? There's kind of a couple of models for how that would take place, but either way, it certainly is a requirement on you and your team.
That's correct, Karen.
And Karen, excellent points. Just one other thing to keep in mind, the original recommendation that we had was along those lines, which is we recommend the secretary to have a competition and pick somebody to go do this.
Right. Yep.
We weren't able to figure out exactly how to say that and do it. And so just as another example of having how a nonprofit, non-government entity can run a consortium and be faster. Okay, since April, there is one now, if you want to use it. And not to say it has to be the only one or whatever, but the point is, let's get going. We need to have some action ongoing. It may not be perfect, especially at the start, but let's see if we can put something together that would be a win-win for government and for industry.
So I think a follow-up question that I have on that is in terms of ability to like get started right now. If COMSTAC were to adopt some version or these exact recommendations, are you saying that you're like HRPC has the funding to get going with tasking immediately, or would that be then subject to advocacy and appropriations in the future?
So HRPC is up and running. We do not have a huge bank account today. And so one option for FAA is to say, all right, well, let's fund the mechanism, and then we'll continue to think about which research tasks we want to do. But whether the COMSTAC supports that or whether AST agrees with that and is able to bring that into being, HRPC is going ahead. And so we are seeking funding from other government agencies, other countries, academia and others, and expect to be able to at least bootstrap ourselves up to be operational and start performing the research that is happening on space flights like we're seeing today, and take better advantage of the data that is or should be gathered.
If I could add on that, the structure of an organization like HRPC would say that if AST were to get involved and say, here are our research priorities, even if there is no direct funding tied to them, it gives that opportunity for others, whether they be academia, whether they be industry, to say, well, that is something we'd like to sponsor, we'd like to invest in, because we then understand it will have a utilization, and we'll eventually get to the point of regulation. So even if it doesn't come with money right away, there's still the opportunity for AST to get involved to help drive where the priorities are being steered.
And we got Karina online there. She's been on there for a while. See Julie here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I just wanted to add a little bit of context maybe to some of the background. So back in 2021, there was an effort similar to this where a lot of folks got involved with some ideas around human space flight and then expanding that to people with disabilities, for example. And CSF at the time, along with MITRE, had worked with Dr. Marge to put on this workshop. We had a lot of CSF members at the time, a lot of launch and reentry operators involved in that workshop. And that was in 2021. It probably carried to 2022. And then that was kind of it. So at the time, like having the industry participation in that effort was critical because the industry operators had all the data to be able to provide to this workshop for any sort of value to what this research could possibly generate. To my knowledge, those launch and reentry operators have not been engaged since. So CSF helped lead that workshop. At the end of it, we just said, this was a great effort, but we didn't intend to continue participating. To my knowledge, the launch and reentry operators also have not. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as like a way of saying, I think it was critical that they participated in that first version. I don't know that they've participated since. And if industry did not get on board with this in the future, I think it would be kind of a wasted effort, to be honest, because they're the ones that have all the information, all the data. So I think having industry kind of chime in on whether this is valuable could be really useful if folks would be willing to continue chiming in on this. From a COMSTAC perspective, I agree with some of the comments that have been said, that I don't think it would be appropriate for us to name any specific organization in any of our recommendations. I personally don't have a problem with saying, these are our recommendations. We think that DOT should consider funding or setting aside funding for research dollars and potentially selecting a nonprofit. But I personally don't think that anything in our write-up should include any organization, named organization. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in. I know that's already been said, but I feel strongly that I just don't think that's COMSTAC's position. And I don't know that we've typically done that, at least in the past couple of years, where we've named a specific entity and said we should fund this organization. Because I think that would be a little bit of a conflict of interest for us to do that as an industry advisory group. So I guess I'll just leave it at that for now.
Excellent comments, and just about I could. Karina, I think there has been an appreciation that industry was very interested and knowledgeable about the subject, but there was at least some concern that somehow it might turn into regulations or requirements. And so that's why, from the HOPC perspective, this is not about regulation. That's not the purpose of the research. It's to help everybody understand what risks are and how to mitigate them. And then if somebody wants to use those for some other purpose, have at it. So that's very important. Julie?
Thanks. I think it's important to give the recommendations some momentum in a neutral way, and would suggest something like this. The Secretary of Transportation establish a budget and mechanisms to competitively award research grants to address priorities in the area of commercial space transportation. I would feel comfortable supporting such a recommendation.
Second. Okay. I'm sorry I didn't get in here in time. I had a transportation challenge this morning.
Come on up, Kate.
Come on. I came in the back so I wouldn't disturb you, and now I'm disturbing you. My apologies.
We got a seat for you.
Well, but the thing is, if we take this percentage of money out of one budget, it's fairly significant. And my concern is that it's coming out of the budget that's already inadequate. So could we somehow or other have other agencies contribute, or put in some language that just said, don't take Bill out of the AST budget? And that 30 million is a lot of money.
Yeah, and that was before. That's since removed. And I think just sort of to Julie's point, I think there's some language in there in Rep 2 around that, not taking from licensing. I think there's some added language, exactly to your concern.
If it's the Secretary of Transportation, is he just going to immediately take it out of the AST budget? Is there a
Okay,
way?
so I'm with you, I'm 100% with you, I think that if we go down that route, I think there's good language along the lines we should add to make sure we're being clear that we're not looking to take licensing dollars. It's 100%. Let me, General Mercer, you're in line here.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of questions, and I agree with my colleague that just spoke. That was going to be my point to some degree, is we probably need to put a finer point on this budget discussion and where this money would come from, where it would come. Is it DOT? Is it do you need to make a run at the Hill and try to get some budget increases from the Hill to cover it? I don't know, but just telling DOT to come up with $30 million or whatever the number is, that's going to come out of Hyatt somewhere. And so I don't know, that one I think we got to flesh out a bit more. And then the other question that I had was had to do with the commitment that the senior NASA executive made, that Dr. Neal had briefed on the slide about their pledge to support. What is unclear is, what does that mean, and to what extent? I think you need to put some flesh around that, and how do you get that support? None of that was really clear there. It's great if they want to commit to support, but what's that look like? What does that support look like, and how do you pull the trigger on it? That's the part that's unclear to me. And NASA, it's great to see that pledge, but NASA is a pretty bureaucratic organization, and I just like to know more about what that looks like.
So, General Mercer, thanks for the question, and happy to talk to you separately on particular details, but just let me respond quickly. Recommendation number 2, as presented, was basically that the office should request increased funding for commercial space transportation research while ensuring that it has the resources needed for both licensing and safety inspection. So it's a request, it's not a given, it doesn't have a number in it, but it says you need more. And how do you get it? You get it from Congress. So if AST can't or won't, if FAA can't or won't, that's another reason why maybe the office needs to be somewhere else. That's just a personal observation.
But to your point, Dr. Neal, yes, you go to the Hill if you need to go there, but that's not fast, right? That doesn't happen overnight.
Exactly.
Good.
So HRPC is up and running, and we're meeting with people, looking for dollars, looking for researchers, looking for data, and hope we can get lots of participants.
Yeah, but you got to get in.
Use an opportunity to say, FAA, would you like to play, either by having a representative on the board of advisors? If you've got research money today, you have a mechanism to use it, or if you know someone else that would be better at this, go for it, but let's get something in place. We need to be able to walk and chew gum here. Commercial space is important. Yes, 450 is important. Yes, the ongoing operation is important, but somebody needs to be paying attention to the future research needs. So what's the mechanism to do that? HRPC is one way for that to get done. Would AST like to participate in some?
If I could add, and I agree that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. And so the recommendations, and if we took recommendations 1 and 2 and deleted the words like HRPC, would those be acceptable as a recommendation to AST to say, look to see if there are organizations out there that you should be involved in. Are there ways to get funding without impacting licensing and safety inspections in the future to meet those research needs, to get the ball rolling so that when the time is appropriate or the opportunities present themselves for funding, we're ready to move forward on that. I'm concerned that we end up circling the drain, going back and forth like we were doing in April, and we don't actually move forward to make the recommendation to actually engage and to set a priority.
So just to keep the discussion going, a suggestion would be let's take the recommendations as presented today, but scratch HRPC so that it's more generic. But that's an example for your information.
Yeah.
Something's there. But let's leave the recommendations generic and see if we can get something started. So that would be my suggestion, to tweak the recommendations.
No, thank you. Thanks for really good suggestions. Why don't, I mean, let's take a look, right? So if we just look at that. And then the other. Okay, the third.
I have a quick question that may be a little bit odd, but why does it have to be a nonprofit?
So we had one slide that was trying to address it. The answer is it doesn't have to be a nonprofit. AST could do this all by itself as a government program, but governments go slow, and we want to be collaborative. And so here's an opportunity to go fast, to be collaborative, and innovative, and all those kinds of things that are not typically associated with government.
So we've got some good suggestions. Thank you. Good suggestions here on the way to move forward. So do we have, I think Julie had some good language. I think it's sort of one approach. It may be very similar. I think if we would move, I'm not sure, Julie, your thoughts on sort of what you recommend sort of looks, I think maybe a lot like number 2, possibly.
It sounded like it looked more like the recommendation that we had in April, almost verbatim.
Yeah, so why don't we, is there a second, why don't we just see if there's a couple of suggestions here, right? I think we've got some language from Julie. I think we've got, another approach. I think we take recommendation 1 and 2 and just strike the specific organization from it. I sort of, do we want to move forward? Do we have a second to kind of move forward on a certain approach, or other suggestions on maybe some recommended language edits?
I think you would need to remove entirely the third recommendation.
I think so too. I think it doesn't. I think you just have 1 and 2 without the reference.
And can you go back to the recommendation?
I also feel like if we're going to vote on this, that we should try to change the wording in real time so everyone knows what they're voting for, if that's possible. Brian?
Is there a break during which
we can take
we could do some practice?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Why don't we take a break? And if we could sort of see if we can shape recommendation 1 and 2 to strike the reference to HRP, and then if we may take a 10-minute break here, then come back and see if we could just look at that and zoom.
So just another idea here before you.
I just also want to chime in that it has been COMSTAC's practice, as I remember it, to also take note of what the wording is in the findings and the observations, because those are what are kind of recorded as the findings and the observations to then support the recommendation. So while the recommendation gets a lot of focus, I want to make sure that we folks probably should take a look at the finding and recommendation observations that lead to the recommendations as well.
I agree. I agree with your point earlier, Mike, which was also bolstered by Karina and Karen. And I think that's why. I mean, is it worth us, like George, taking some time you guys are you're operating, you're doing work. I mean, is it worth seeing how that goes for a period of time as an independent organization, and then seeing if you're getting input from companies that are doing this research in space and in other research areas, and reconvening it down the road, so COMSTAC has a better sense of whether or not this approach is not specific to your organization, but in general, viable and successful.
So I respectfully push back on that. I think we need to have some motion. The premise is commercial space transportation related research is good and appropriate. We recognize money isn't growing on trees, but if we protect from the high priority things, we can ask for more money. In parallel, if FAA, ASC, if they would like to, has the opportunity to engage with groups like this to start at least talking about, here's our needs, and what you're doing there, that looks really interesting. You know, maybe we'll be able to help.
Well, I don't think there's any barrier, right, to FAA engages with all the time, every day, multiple times a day. I mean,
Right, but we need a virtuous cycle here, that FAA says, yeah, that looks good, or we're gonna ask for money and we're gonna do something in the future. That's a good first step.
Can I offer something here? I think about things this way, particularly as we get recommendations from the COMSTAC. We certainly benefit from recommendations that are actionable, things that we can actually move on and execute. I like the committee to consider and think about what is the problem statement as it relates to this recommendation. What problem are we looking, or challenge are we looking to address here? Is it simply, you know, the FAA needs more research dollars to invest? What is the problem statement that we're trying to get at with this recommendation? And that might help shape what the recommendation is, if we really have a clear understanding of what the problem is, or what the challenge is that we're looking to address.
Thank you. Center of Excellence is gone. Something needs to take its place, and yes, more research dollars and effort are needed.
I would even add, as you specifically mentioned before when you were talking with ASTM, the importance of involvement in terms of developing standards to ensure that as they move forward, they reflect the needs of government, which potentially for regulatory and certification licenses. Research, it follows along exactly the same thing, making sure that research is directed or at least impacted or guided to meet the needs of wherever the FAA believes those gaps are being, so that they can be filled appropriately, so that you have the information, so that when you come up with a regulation, you come up with an advisory circular, it's based on knowledge and understanding of what the issues are and what the solutions might be. So sometimes it's just directing what those issues are and what the needs are.
Additional thoughts, feedback? Do I have some general sense of whether we move forward with the edited recommendations, or are we headed to a different future?
Based on the conversations I've been editing recommendations,
All right, well, yeah, General Mercer.
Yeah, I think you need to address in some way Mr. Coleman's question, because I think it's about spot on question, right? It's relevant to what we're trying to build in recommendations. You know, what are we trying to fix? I don't think we really answered that, did we?
It was kind of written into recommendation 1, which was to share the research needs and priorities of the ASTM, so that, or ASTs, so that we understand that industry, academia, non-government agencies understand what our priorities are, but then for the FAA to understand where they're going, so that they can drive regulation in the future based upon where research might be heading.
It feels to me, Mike, like there's a little bit of a general reluctance to proceed at this point with this recommendation, just open questions and concerns from the members of the COMSTAC. I don't know. That's just my general observation.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling. I understand, don't want specific entities to be recommended or included. Got it, we can fix that. Is there disagreement with the value of a research effort across industry, government, and academia that is focused on the needs of AST? I don't understand if there's reluctance on that.
Well, so maybe a dumb question, but a question that I have is typically if industry wants to push forward some sort of commercial offering, there needs to be research done to beat that the companies do that research, they fund it. And then we show up and say, do you want to do this? And the FAA has to then tell us how we move forward with that. And I think if the commercial offering is so advanced that hasn't been considered, and that would be like a gap area, right?
That's the old throw it over the fence concept, where someone develops it and then government agencies have to figure out how to regulate it or approve it.
Right.
Versus getting a collaborative approach, which is to have everybody involved as close to the beginning, as close to the conceptual design, to ensure that everything matures.
So this would be that kind of concept. I guess I'm just not
I think an
seeing.
example of that, sorry, just an example, if you go all the way back to the Center of Excellence and what it funded, maybe folks don't have quite the history of what that was for and how it helped bootstrap the industry. There were a lot of examples. I'll just pick one simple one, which was, as it relates to spaceflight participants on the medical front, Center of Excellence helped fund a lot of independent studies, centrifuge studies, which helped calibrate and coordinate the actual medical risks to people in the commercial side. So and that was 8-10 years ago, right? So that was a fundamental thing that industry itself wasn't going to be able to fund. And having a Center of Excellence from the FAA was a super big help. I think that's what Dr. Neal's referring to. The concept of having government assisted research is a good thing, even if you don't have a list of it, right? The concept of being able to draw on it, it's important.
But is it driven by like commercial goals? Like, does industry drive what the gaps then are? Essentially.
Yeah, the theory is that you've got all the players, industry, academia, and government, and they each put on the table, here's some things that I'm willing to talk about, at least at some non-proprietary level, and we have a need there, and academia goes, oh great, we have expertise, or we'll put some people on that, and somebody else says, I don't know about this rocket science, but I've got a lot of resources that I can put on the table, so I'm willing to put some money on that, and it will be to the benefit of the community as opposed to one company or one school. So it's a different model, but it's collaborative, and it doesn't work for everything. But I think there's some real win-win opportunities there.
So then the problem statement might be something like, if we just throw something over the fence, that might stifle progress, because then regulators have to catch up with cutting edge research. And so something like this can help keep the momentum going of innovation or something like that. Is that?
It can maybe accelerate research progress in a way that commercial space is already doing in an amazing way. But again, we got more people, and we're going to need more people that are smarter about this. Talk about the workforce pipeline. How are you going to get it? Well, somebody in college that has been working on centrifuge studies for civilian spaceflight. Perfect, but again, to have the FAA say, here's our research needs, to have nonprofits and others saying, well, we can help with that, or here's some data, 1 + 1 = 3. There's some things that would work for.
So I think we've got a couple different options here, right? So I'll turn to my friend Robert and his rules and see if we can find a way here. So I think we've got, one path here is, I think we've got a proposal to work, edit recommendations 1 and 2 for a vote. I think another path would be to simply table, table the discussion and maybe, work further along the lines that Calvin had suggested. So why don't we just sort of see, do we want to take a vote on one of these paths? Do we want to consider the table for now and see where the COMSTAC is before we go work edits 1 and 2?
So, your call, obviously, but I think we can quickly have a revised recommendation that you can look at and decide whether you like it or not. If the answer is no, or if the answer is table it, that's fine.
I think that's fair. So why don't we do a short break here? 5 minutes break here. We quickly put up some edited 1 and 2. I think we just vote, sort of up or down, right? And if we think it needs more work, I think we can also just, vote so no that it's either work. Sounds good. All right, thank you all. We're taking a break. We're good. All right, we're good. All right, excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for a productive break. I was reminded that during the course of the discussion, we actually had a motion and a formal second to Julie's language. And so Julie sort of taken it as a friendly amendment to also add Kate's comments on making sure we don't upset the budget here. And so essentially we have two different we have if we think of recommendation 1 and 2 there were 4, Julie's language is really an edit on recommendation 2. And so what I'm going to propose here we do have the motion on recommendation 2 as friendly amended. And so if we just take a look at what that language is, look at it, I don't know if there's a way to zoom in or unblue. I don't know if anyone can read this. Okay.
It's unblue.
There we go.
The red is the edit.
So what this says, it's Julie's language, then adding the language about protecting licensing and other funding. So that would be the current recommendation. We have a motion to vote on. I'll let people read that and then I'll say it. We also then would have an edited version of recommendation 1. We go to a second vote after we vote on recommendation 2. There'd be if desired, there'd be a second motion on what was recommendation 1, and we have some edits on there to addressing some of the COMSTAC's concerns. Sorry,
why don't I go ahead and read it?
Yeah, please. Excellent. So go ahead. So we have a motion on recommendation. We have a motion to vote on recommendation 2 as edited. And so Julie, if you could go ahead and read that.
Thanks. The Secretary of Transportation should establish a budget and mechanisms to competitively award research grants to address priorities in the area of commercial space transportation, while ensuring that the Office of Commercial Space Transportation has the resources needed for both licensing and safety inspections.
So
I think I'm missing that the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. Thanks.
Could we put in that they don't fund it? I mean, he could say, hey, they have enough money, I'm just gonna take the 30 million out of it. So.
There's no 30 million. There's no 30 million.
Okay.
There's no
Yeah,
This is it. There's nothing, no other than that.
Well, so you basically have an unfunded.
That's
recommendation. So is there a better way to protect the current budget? Or is there a way to say, comes out of the secretary side?
No, right now, at this point, it's just saying that the secretary should establish a budget while ensuring that it doesn't impact OST's licensing and safety operations.
Yeah, I just don't trust it.
Right. So we have this on the floor here for vote. Why don't we?
May I offer another small edit to it? Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say, when we say while ensuring the Office of Commercial Space Transportation has the resources for both licensing and safety, why don't you just say that ensuring that the Office of Commercial Space Transportation has the resources needed for the full range of its responsibilities?
I mean, I agree. I don't disagree or object to that particular wording change, but I mean, at the end of the day, you know, it's kind of a subjective determination about what AST needs for licensing, you know, relative to an unfunded mandate to establish a new requirement and fund that. And so, as Kate is pointing out, you know, money is always a zero sum game, and so, yeah, I think that's the concern.
We have the language. We have a second on it. Do we want to consider a friendly amendment to the language, or do we, just want to proceed with the vote here? Julie, do you further thoughts on this?
Well, did we decide to disregard the suggestion I just made, or no?
Well, we did. We have. That's the. Well, we have a motion on the floor here to vote on this.
Okay.
And so we can vote on it as proposed by General Mercer. I presume we have a second on that. Oh, we also may have not consensus TV to move it also, which we'll see to vote.
Yeah, I think it's up to you to decide whatever she wants to say.
Pressure's on you, Julie.
I can accept the amendment.
All right, so we'll take a vote here on recommendation 2, as amended by General Mercer there in the last class. All right. Just march through the list I have here. I'm not, believe we're alphabetical. Let's see, Karina, Dries.
I'll vote yes on recommendation 2.
All right, Matt.
Me?
Yeah.
I vote no.
I don't think Elwin's on.
He's over.
So, John, Elvin? Elwin?
I vote yes.
All right. Tony, Figo?
Yes.
Me, I'll vote yes. Mariba? Dale?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
General Mercer?
I vote yes as amended, not what's on the screen.
Correct. Megan. Mike, Moses?
I vote yes.
All right. Dr. Neal?
Yes.
Dr. Parker? All right. Melanie?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes, as amended.
Amanda?
Yes.
Ganesh? Jay? Jay, you lose Jay? No.
He went to get coffee.
Let's go. Pause a second. This is not. Julie?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
All right. All right. Well, the yeses have it. So the COMSTAC accepts that recommendation as edited. And now, so that's take care of that. Thank you all for your patience on that one.
And I would like to make a motion.
Okay.
To accept recommendation 1 as amended on the screen. And that one is read, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation should engage with research organizations focused on commercial space transportation on a regular basis to share research needs and priorities and to receive status updates on research accomplishments. To ensure project oversight and appropriate involvement, an FAA representative could serve or participate on an ad hoc basis on such a research organization.
Do we have a second on that?
Second.
All right, second, why don't we give everyone just a minute to take a look at that language and then vote on recommendation 1 as amended and read. All right. Karina?
I'll vote yes.
Matt Dunn?
I will vote no.
John? Elvin? John? Come back to John. Tony?
Yes.
I'll vote yes. Dale?
Yes.
Kate?
I'm sorry, I just don't know how they're gonna fund the extra works, no.
Okay. General Mercer?
Just a question before I vote. Are we also assigning DOT to do some homework in terms of identifying the research organizations focused on commercial space transportation? Or is there a list that already exists of the group?
No, we're not. We're assigning it as part of this group. I don't know if there is a list. No, I think we have a further recommendation. But I don't know if there is a list.
As I sit here, the way I take it, it would be homework, because I am not aware of an existing list of organizations organization. And so this is a recommendation. We would have to research who is out there in order to carry this out.
Yeah, this one I'm just real soft on because it's just not a hard hitting recommendation for them to be able to execute. I could see this hitting their desk and saying, okay, we'll get to this when we get to it. We got to go out and research these organizations. I think I'm just soft on this one. I vote no on this one.
You do know one organization.
That's one.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's true. You do know one.
Mike Moses,
Vote yes.
Dr. Neal. Yes. Dr. Parker. Melanie.
Oh, yes.
Karen. Sharon.
Yeah, I share some concerns on this one, particularly the second part, and so I'm voting no.
All right. Amanda. Yes. Jay. Can you come back to me? Yes. Sorry, I just walked in. Yeah. Julie.
Yes.
Anne.
Yes.
Okay. So are we doing just one, 2 you adopt? Okay, John, are you on, John?
Yes, sorry, I stepped away just a minute. I vote yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. All right, and John voted yes. Jay voted no. Just on. At 11 yeses, which would pass the recommendation on majority. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 no's. So I recorded. Okay. All right. Any further recommendations on this?
This is Ted here. Since it has passed, I would refine this more to give them something actionable to work with. Like, we say, reach out to these engagers on a regular basis. What is regular basis? To me, monthly. Somebody else may say twice a year. Somebody else might say once a year. Give them something to work with. What is regular basis? If we're going to give a recommendation, tell them what we think that should be.
I trust Kelvin, and he can decide.
I can offer in the past, regular basis for us has meant annually. I think I'm right in saying that. I mean, we called and pulled together our research needs. Again, going back to the old model with the COE, we would offer up to the COE our research needs and desires at least, at the beginning of the year, or some point of the year. It was an annual thing. It was not a monthly thing. We were here's something else, here's something else, here's something else. It was one time every year.
So why don't we put that in there? A year, on an annual basis.
Because he may change his mind next month, and that's okay.
Or he might find that the organization or an organization that they cooperate with meets biannually or semi-annually, and that would be inappropriate. So I leave it to them to determine what an appropriate basis is. Regular basis.
Okay, but wait a minute. We're supposed to be giving them a recommendation. Here's what we recommend you do. They don't have to take it. If you tell them you want to do it once a year and they want to do it every 6 months, they'll do that. I think we ought to give them a recommendation. That's the problem I have with this. It's too soft to give them something to do, to work with.
Right. So General Mercer, do you have a third recommendation you'd like to propose?
I would put a time frame in regular basis, whatever that is, whatever the consensus of the group is, a year, 6 months, or whatever. They will do what they want if they want to do something with it.
Well, again, we're an advisory committee. We don't direct, we recommend, we advise.
Yeah, so you're
Well,
so you're recommending they engage once a year.
All right, so just, can we, I mean, do you want to make a recommendation? Do you want to put forward a recommendation that this engagement occur in some period of time? We can see if there's consensus.
Look, I don't want to be overly difficult. This one I'm soft on. I voted my mind and conscience. It's passed, so, we can move on with it.
Okay. All right, well, so we are set. My hopes of a fast morning did not quite transpire. I've become much sharper on our order, so there has been some benefits to this discussion. But yeah, so appreciate everybody's, thank you all for the patience and colleagueship and working through that. Really appreciate it. We do have a second task to talk about workforce. That's slated to be more of a discussion also with our AST friends to get their, to understand some of the things they've been looking at. Do you think, will you all be available if we do that at 1 o'clock? Is our folks on the AST side available if we do that after lunch break? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I suggest that maybe we take a try to get return by 1 o'clock here, if that makes sense, so they're on the room here. Excellent. All right. So we'll adjourn till 1 o'clock and then we'll talk workforce with AST. So thank you all.